Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Gail Preston. I'm the co-director of the Doctoral Training Centre in which we are currently sitting, and I'm also the lead on this new initiative that we're running within the University of Oxford called Repower, which is all about supporting students who've sort of had a break between perhaps their first degree and then coming back into sort of postgraduate study, or have come into higher education later on in their career, in making a sort of a good transition into doctoral study and making sure that the admissions processes and everything we do are better geared up to support students from these backgrounds. So I should mention that this particular initiative we're running is supported and led particularly by the Interdisciplinary Life and Environmental Science Landscape Award Programme, which involves the whole group of universities and institutions that you can see listed along the bottom. But we're delighted that we also have support from parts of the university that connect to many different aspects of scientific research across the university, particularly that aspects of the research that are funded by UKRI. So we're very grateful for the support we get from UKRI and the work that we do with our partners. So I wanted to briefly start by explaining where we're sitting today. So we're currently sitting in the University of Oxford's Doctoral Training Centre. This is a very distinctive and special place within the university where we host a number of different doctoral training programs, and we have done so for sort of well over sort of approaching 25 years. And this allows us to build a community of students and a community of academics supporting those students who can think about how we can sort of make our doctoral training programs the best that they can be. So within this building, we're supporting scientific breakthroughs, we're developing new skills and interdisciplinary collaborations. We do a lot of work with industry and non-academic partners that's underpinning industrial innovation. And there's a really strong focus through everything we do on equality, equity, diversity, inclusion, and societal impact, and sort of building a real sense of a community amongst sort of our staff and students that enables them to sort of succeed in their doctoral studies. And you can see on the right-hand side of this the 5 programs that we sort of currently have within the doctoral trainings that have been admitting or just about to start admitting students for admission in 2026. So we're going to start with a general introduction to postgraduate study, and perhaps we'll give you some insights you haven't really thought about what the options are that are available to you. But the first thing we might want to think about is why you might be interested in going on to do a postgraduate degree. And there are lots of good reasons why you might want to do a postgraduate degree. You might just have a thirst for knowledge. You might want to make an impact through your research. You might particularly enjoy learning and problem solving, which is critical to a lot of science doctoral research. You might be thinking about how it will increase your employability or your earning potential in fields that might require analytical communication or quantitative skills, whether in academia or in other areas. It might be something that will enable you to make a career pivot or change your specializations. It's certainly an opportunity to build connections through the individuals that you come into contact within the university and the different partners that interact with universities. And inherently you develop skills such as organisation, self-motivation, independent planning, and project management. So there are actually probably more types of postgraduate study than you may be aware of. So typically people who've engaged with higher education before, they have a bachelor's degree, and they might have gone on to do some continuing professional development in the course of their career. Increasingly within the UK, we have what's called an integrated master's, where the bachelor's degree is then followed by a master's degree for 1 year. So these are 4-year degrees, but often they're still thought of in some way as undergraduate degrees. There are also shorter postgraduate qualifications that you can work towards. A postgraduate certificate normally takes about 6 months. A diploma might take 1 to 2 years. Often these are undertaken part-time. Usually they involve a combination of taught and assessed modules, and they're assessed by coursework and examinations. And then we have master's degrees. These come into sort of a taught form, typically anywhere from 9 months to 2 years, or masters by research can be 1 to 3 years. So these can involve taught modules. Both kinds can involve a degree of taught courses, but they usually involve some component of research. So they can be assessed by coursework, examinations, but often a dissertation is involved, a sort of a presentation of the research that you've done. Then we come on to the doctorate. That can be anywhere from 2+ years. Typically in the UK, it's more likely to be sort of 3 to 4 years if it's full-time, and then becomes longer if it's part-time. But there are other types of doctorates for those who are actively engaged in sort of academic or sort of scientific adjacent sort of activities. So there is something that isn't offered by the University of Oxford, but is offered by some UK universities, which is called a doctorate by publication, which is where you actually sort of work with a supervisor within a university to sort of build the publications that you've done into a thesis. And then there's something again called a professional doctorate, and this is very much for people who want to make their area of work the subject of their doctorate. So it's more about looking at the practices, whether you're in education or policy, and turning the sort of the insights you're developing through that into a doctorate. So these are typically assessed by sort of dissertation and viva. And with all of these degrees, you'll sometimes find combinations where you might find joint masters, which are 2 master's degrees linked together, or you might find a master's degree linked to a doctorate in a sort of 1+3 or a 1+2 format. So today, we're mainly going to focus on the sort of the right-hand side of this. We're going to focus on research-related qualifications, particularly leading into doctoral study. If you're intrigued by this idea of a professional doctorate, my colleague Russ Lewis, who was, when he made this presentation, was at the Open University, so the great presentation explains what a professional doctorate is. He did this for our Repower workshop last year, and it's still available on YouTube if you want to learn more about professional doctorates and his personal journey as someone who did a professional doctorate. So all of these different types of postgraduate education, you might think of them as they're training knowledge workers. And you might think about preparing for a doctorate a bit like preparing for a marathon. You're not going to leap right in there and do a doctoral viva, sort of in a couple of months' time. In a few months' time, you might be ready to do a 5K, sort of the PG cert. Bit more effort, you might be ready for the 10K. At the masters, we're up to the half marathon stage. Often it is something you can get to sort of halfway through your doctorate, and the doctorate is kind of the full marathon. And if you use this analogy to sort of sporting achievement, then we can also see as inherently what is part of building a doctorate is that it's actually building that experience and progress over time systematically, so that by the time you get to the end, you're really well prepared to sort of complete that final viva and submit that thesis and be an expert in the area that you've done your research on. So the same way, we think about an athlete trying to develop their fitness for a major event. We can learn a lot from the way the top athletes train. They're clear in their objectives and they're making this very consistent progress to succeed in their doctoral research. If you go on to do a research degree, as I mentioned, there's lots of different skills that you might develop. You're going to develop knowledge of the field of study you're working in, your critical thinking skills, your networking skills, time management, data analysis, and communication. But you're also going to develop advantages in other areas you might not think about as much. A lot of research these days is team-based. You're going to be working on your team skills. It might be opening up new career opportunities. And in the long run, might be helping you with a future competitive job application. So we're going to focus mainly on this model of research degrees, masters and doctorate, which involve this dissertation based on your research. This can include research that you've undertaken within a team, as long as your contribution to what you're putting into your thesis is very clearly explained. It's always done in conjunction with supervisors. There's always going to be an academic supervisor, but there may be supervisors from other types of organisations that are adjacent to research, and you're going to be assessed by a dissertation and a viva. And a typical dissertation you're going to be producing in either area is going to give an indication of your understanding of the prior work that leads into the aims of your study. Then you've actually got the results that you've generated, whatever aspect of research you're in. This leads to interpretation and critical analysis, and then thinking about the context and implications for further work. So within this, the supervisor that you have plays a really critical role. So it's worth thinking a little bit about the responsibilities of supervisors. So your doctoral supervisor should be someone that you're having regular meetings with. At Oxford, someone on a full-time doctorate would expect that they're meeting at least once every 2 weeks, sort of say, or equivalent. They're helping you to decide on your research plan, your program of work, helping you to sort of set expectations for what you need to achieve and the milestones by which you need to achieve it. They're going to give you feedback on your work. Where relevant, they're going to be advising you on health and safety or the particular training that you might need to succeed in your doctorate, and that you have a plan of how you're going to move ahead, and then reporting on your progress and needs. But ultimately, the work has to be put in by you. The motivation has to come from you. They're there to guide you on the journey. And as mentors, you'll find that supervisors have a lot of different sort of mentoring styles. And often supervisors have to be all of these things for their students at different points in the doctoral journey. You have the person you might say is the challenger. They're helping you stay focused and goal-oriented and achieve what you need to achieve. Sometimes you need the cheerleader who's going to be optimistic and supportive. Sometimes you need the educator who's going to help you develop the knowledge and skills that you need. And sometimes you need the ideator who's going to help you with your brainstorming and your sort of planning and sort of empowering you to take your ideas forward. You're going to find that there are supervisors out there who have different mentoring styles. You might have the one who's a bit more of the helicopter or the drone supervisor who's always there sort of hovering over you, watching what you're doing, giving you guidance on a day-to-day basis. Or you might have a supervisor who's a bit more like a lighter. It's like, I'm here if you need me. My beacon is lit. If you're in trouble, this is where I am, sort of it. So you'll find that there are different supervisors out there. So for you, as you're thinking about your doctoral journey, you'll need to start thinking about what type of supervisor do I need to succeed on this journey? Reflect on your own personal attributes. What would be complementary to that in terms of supporting you on your work? In sort of, say, modern sort of doctoral research, you might have thought about it just being one person, but it's far more common these days to have a supervisory team composed of 2 or more supervisors, and that's a requirement for most of the programs that we have here in the Doctoral Training Centre. Typically, one supervisor is nominally the primary supervisor, and then you're based in the department and organisation that supervisor is based in. Often you might have a day-to-day sort of mentor who might be a more experienced researcher within the research group, might be a postdoctoral researcher or a senior technician or a senior graduate student. And within a university context, you'll often have an additional mentor or advisor who's not actually involved in your research at all, but you can go to for pastoral advice along the journey. And everyone within the department or program is also supported by a director of graduate studies or a program director who sort of has oversight of what's going on with students in that department or organisation. So when it comes to assessment for a doctorate, it can go through a number of different stages. The most common stages you'll find, I'm kind of using Oxford as a bit of an example, but other universities are very similar, is that you might have a research proposal phase up front where you actually set out the proposal for what it is you're going to do and get feedback on that. Then there might be a first examination 1 to 2 years into your studies if you're going full-time, which is really where you're sort of demonstrating that you're progressing and that you've sort of good knowledge and you've got a feasible project plan. So this is often where you're sort of transitioning from kind of being a probationary student to one who's sort of formally sort of accepted onto the DPhil pathway of study or the PhD pathway of study. Then there's usually a second examination, usually about a year before you're due to submit your sort of thesis or equivalent. And this is again to help you on that final stretch, that final sort of journey to submit the thesis. Obviously we call this confirmation of status, which is all about having a good plan to complete the project. And in the end, you're going to have a viva. Typically that will involve you and 2 academics with relevant expertise. One will be within your sort of university, one will be from outside that you're going to discuss your work with in depth. So again, we can think about this in terms of our marathon preparation, all the way from the 5K research proposal to the 10K first examination, and finally the marathon at the end that is the full sort of 3-hour, 4-hour discussion with people. And again, often the meetings you're having are sort of equivalently getting longer and longer, sort of sometimes to a certain degree as you're going on. So if you're thinking about it, you're always going to end with this sort of doctoral or master's viva with 2 academics. What they're trying to decide in the viva is that you're the author of the work that you've presented, that they've read, that you have a good knowledge of the field of learning in the subject of the thesis, that you've made a sort of significant and substantial contribution and that you've got a lucid and scholarly sort of thesis that merits the degree. This gets moderated a little bit if we go for a master's qualification, that you need to have shown competence in investigating the chosen topic, and that you've made a worthwhile contribution to knowledge and understanding in the field of learning of the thesis. I mentioned the doctorate by publication. This is where you apply to be accepted by a student based on your published work. I say typically it might be 6 months to a year. In this case, the supervisor is there to help you develop the work you've done into sort of a thesis format ready for that viva and help you develop your knowledge and preparation so you'll be well placed to succeed in a viva based on the work that you've done. But it very much is the same criteria as a standard doctorate. So those are the different types of sort of qualifications and research degrees. But there are obviously many ways to continue to advance your learning without going to the formal journey of actually enrolling on a degree. So remember that there are other opportunities available to you. They might be sort of modules, micro-credentials, short courses, continuing professional sort of development courses. And all of these could be sort of what you need right now, or they might be what you need as a sort of a stepping stone to applying for a master's or a PhD, to sort of put your toe in the water and see, is this the right journey for me? Am I ready to go back into sort of a more sort of research and sort of education setting? Often you'll find these type of courses offered through a university's Department of Continuing Education. So say at Oxford we have a Department of Continuing Education. And obviously one of our partners, the Open University, is also really experienced in offering a range of courses that people can either sort of enroll in different contexts, sort of say including some open distance learning and free courses. So this might be a good way of say testing the water, thinking, can I make that commitment of time to actually engage with a shorter format of education before I actually delve all the way into sort of say a full master's or PhD? How is it going to work out for me? Then you're going to need a research project. Say that project is going to have at least two elements, you and a supervisor. It might be that the actual project comes largely from you, or the project comes largely from the supervisor, or some conversation between you. And in some cases, a non-academic partner might also contribute to the development of that project. Obviously, where funding is involved, this may be subject to the funding that exists for a particular funded research project, and then that kind of constrains you to the research that's been funded to a greater degree, depending on the source of that funding. In some cases, that funding might come from, say, a non-academic partner, and projects with non-academic partners can be undertaken wholly or partially in an academic or a non-academic setting. So some organisations, particularly those that are really well established in terms of research, some companies, some institutes, mean that you would be working there rather than in a university, and they can provide the sort of the support you'd need in partnership with a supervisor at a university. You can actually do sort of research that's effectively something you're engaged in either full or part-time as an employee, and that can contribute towards a PhD. It might be on a project where you're mainly in a university, but you have a period of residency, sort of say, and sort of internship with that partner organisation. There's usually a contract between the university and the partner organisation that addresses the actual supervision and the sort of intellectual property and responsibilities. Sometimes they might be able to provide additional support. And these type of projects with external partners are often great in terms of the way in which they provide direct impact for the sponsoring partner or sector, and it can be a really great way to build your sort of professional networks and skills. The other type of project we increasingly see coming forward are projects that we might think about as sort of like in the enterprise innovation and sort of impact area, where we have projects that have strong translational potential and broader impact. So that might be commercial impact, spin-outs, startups, licensing opportunities. Might be clinical impact, things that would lead into sort of clinical trials down the line. Might be into policy or practice. Might be building tools or collections or resources. So again, you might actually have some ideas along this line from the work that you're currently doing right now. So this is to sort of say that these are definitely opportunities there. If, however, you're in the position of having a great idea for a project that you want to do that has commercial potential, I would certainly advise you that you actually sort of protect yourself before actually having conversations with industry or other partners, and only disclose, so say, minimal information. And if you want to go into detail, make sure there are appropriate agreements in place before you're saying, I've got this amazing idea for this research project, and telling everybody about it, sort of that I could do during my PhD. So make sure that if you're bringing something that has a lot of commercial potential, look after yourself at that point in time. And if this is an area of interest for you, then studying for a degree can open up lots of opportunities for further training and support in these sort of areas, whether it's entrepreneurship or policy or professional skills. There's a really wide range of different opportunities, and we can talk more about that if people want to. If you are in the process of developing something that has commercial relevance as part of your degree, usually the university has some sort of claim to ownership of the IP or the equity arising from that in a partial sense. So again, be aware that that's something that would exist, but there's usually models for transferring that research into sort of a commercial domain through tech transfer companies, or sort of whether they're external or internal, to help you develop pattern and commercialize your research and take it to the next stage. That's particularly strong at Oxford. We've now got well over 300 spin-out companies that have kind of come out in recent years from research that's been ongoing within the university, and many of those have been highly successful, including some that have come off the projects that students have been doing within the Doctoral Training Centre. Some programs, including the program that I'm the director of for, the ALESLA program, has a compulsory sort of work experience part to it, an internship or placement with a non-academic organisation. And even if your program doesn't have that, it can be something that you can do. You can actually take some time out to get experience in a different sector, or to make a research visit to another institution. And these can further help to develop your skills and your networks and your employability. The other feature that increasingly doctoral training programs these days have is that they offer a sort of a taught component. So again, a lot of the programs we have within the Doctoral Training Centre have an initial period that has some core training relevant to the interests of that program, typically in the first term, and then further advanced training that goes beyond that, depending on students' interest, to sort of upskill people. That's partly in the context of the programs we run, because we're often bringing in people perhaps from a bioscience background and helping them develop computational and sort of mathematical sort of skills, or we're bringing in people from a physical science background and bringing them sort of up to speed on, say, biology, and what's happening in sort of that field, so they can bring those disciplines together. So the duration of this can really vary widely by program, anywhere from sort of 3 weeks to sort of to 12 months. So just to give you an example of that, if we take, say, the ALESLA program, an example of what a first year in sort of one of these structured programs would look like, typically we'd start with our sort of induction. We'll be welcoming a cohort of about 60 students in the autumn onto the program. Then we have our core skills training in the first term. Students are also doing lots of experiential work, sort of in team projects. And again, that skills training isn't being lectured at like I'm being out. It's largely just experiential work of actually doing the programming, doing the maths, doing the statistics, as some of our students could tell you. And then students in our program actually go on to do sort of 2 test projects before they decide what their main project is going to be. We call them rotations. In other programs, you might go straight into your main doctoral project at that point in time. And at some point during the first year, you're sort of developing the proposal for the work that you're going to do. For us, it comes after the rotations. As you go on through your sort of doctoral work, there's going to be further opportunities to develop your skills through professional skills courses that sort of address, sort of say, different areas of work. And these are, again, not just relevant to developing a doctorate, they might give you lots of skills for your future careers. So they might be about developing your communication skills, developing your professional skills as a scientist, understanding more about running a project and sort of the ethics of doing your research, or it might be more about the practice, everything from sort of managing your supervisor through to sort of CV writing and planning to sort of move on to the next step in your career. One useful sort of set of resources you might find is a set of resources provided by an organisation called Vitae. And they have a lot about thinking about how you can develop as a researcher, the skills you develop, and how to plan your journey as a researcher. This particular diagram I took from them, and it sort of shows their sort of employability framework of how you map on sort of the different skills that you develop in a PhD onto where it might sort of translate into skills that employers value in future work. So doing a doctorate or PhD gives you sort of lots of demonstrable skills for your future employability that we've talked about thus far, everything from critical thinking through to project management. And often when we talk to our employers in industry or other sectors, they really only value the specific technical skills or academic background if they're really, really aligned with that particular project, which is rare. What they more value is that they have people who have these broad skills that they've developed through their PhD, and that they're flexible and adaptable and they're able to learn and able to sort of to work in a team and work with others. So sort of a doctorate is not actually an end in itself or a master's degree. It is another step in your career journey. And most academic institutions will have some sort of career development office that can support you in exploring career directions and opportunities and providing you advice on that. And as you work through your doctorate, you'll be part of a community, part of a network. So here, when the DTC say we're welcoming over 100 students, so probably in the autumn, onto different training programs. You might have a cohort within your department or your organisation, and you're getting lots of opportunities to develop your network and have engaged with communities across all life stages. Some universities provide specific sort of social opportunities for older or returning students and their family members. So, for example, here at Oxford, we have a mature students network. We have a newcomers club for the family of more mature students as they're coming in, sort of get them embedded into Oxford. And increasingly, what we're really trying to ensure is that universities are places that really recognise and support diversity sort of in all its forms, and there's a really strong focus on how we can better promote sort of belonging and well-being, which is part of what we're trying to sort of support with these efforts today.